It's very much giving.
It's giving what?
Hello, and welcome back to Super Hell, aka the Mysteries Podcast, a show where two recovering supernatural fans subject themselves to a rewatch. So no one, I cannot stress this enough, no one else ever has to watch Supernatural again. My name is Ollie. I use any pronouns, and you can find me on social media at Ollie Fresh. That's fresh with a PH.
And my name is Klaudia with a K. My pronouns are she, her, and you can find me on social media at Klaudia says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A says.
My gosh, is that local celebrity Klaudia says? I love that.
So much like last week, this week we are very sad to inform you that we are going to bring you 2 episodes that happen to actually be quite good.
And I would also argue that they are better than the 2 from last week. These 2, not only, here's the other thing too, not only are they just good episodes, they're also like fundamental.
Yeah.
To Supernatural. These set up 2 really big things that happen a lot, at least in the next 3 or 4 seasons.
Well, and the first one that I'm going to talk about is one that, very much deals with a thing we've talked about before of, maybe the humans were the real monsters.
So true.
And then the second one is, some major, major important lore shit that, and that episode is so memorable to me that when the opening started, I was like, oh,
no,
are we
exactly.
already there? I was like, shit, okay.
No, sometimes I do forget how, some things get introduced really early on. I forget, especially in, the beginning of season 2, there's a lot of stuff that I've been like, oh, yeah, I forgot that was a thing. But this next episode is so, not this first one, but the next one is so iconic that it's, because the opening scene is so much different than anything else in the show, and we will talk about it. But for now, let's get back to our roots.
Yeah, so, this is season 2, episode 7, The Usual Suspects. So, as we said last week, we are on a little East Coast tour, which they don't go to the East Coast a lot. They're usually, in the Midwest or something. I guess this was when they were really trying to be they go all over America before they were like, yeah, fuck it, we're just in the woods in Vancouver, fuck them.
Sam and Dean are stuck in traffic on I-95, so they were like, we can't keep doing this. We're just never going back to the East Coast again.
Sam and Dean are stuck on the they're stuck on in the purgatory that is the capital Beltway.
They're like, help, Cass, you need to come get us off 495 immediately. GW Parkway is a mess. That's some very local humor. If you guys aren't from the DMV, I'm really sorry.
This is a very DMV centric podcast.
Yeah, this post was made by the DMV Gang.
So basically, that is because this episode occurs in Baltimore, which again, like I said last week, there aren't a lot of city episodes of this show. Last time was Philadelphia. This time is Baltimore. So,
and I must also say, as someone who has been to Baltimore very many times in my life, immediately you could tell that it was not actually Baltimore. Immediately
you can tell. Much like with Philadelphia, I was like, that is okay. So, it opens, we are in Baltimore, and we see a cop. He's walking through a police station. He's talking on a cell phone. He gets to a fax machine. And shout out to 2006, because there's a lot with fax machines in this episode. It's printing off a fax. He takes it out, and he looks at it, and then he's like, I need to call you back. I will also say this episode is actually quite interesting in that they were we're going to stray from being a supernatural procedural to give it more of a Criminal Minds kind of feel, which is kind of fun because you're like, oh, what would it be like if they tried to catch Sam and Dean, they were actual real criminals? Because as we've talked about in previous episodes, they have been wanted multiple times, even though Dean has faked his death several times, or once at this point, not several times.
Don't worry, he will though.
He will. But yeah, so it's It's very interesting. It's a very interesting framing device that they use that I may not come across in all of the plot that I'm giving you. So he hangs up the phone. He's like, something very urgent. And then elsewhere, there's this team of cops. They're making their way into like a motel room with a gun, and it's like a SWAT team. And it's basically panning back and forth between these two things. And there's this one cop, his name is Pete, and he's talking to someone across the table, like in an interrogation room, and he's like, at first I thought you were just stepping up your game. And he's like, credit card fraud, breaking and entering. This one puzzled me. Grave desecration. And he's like, but still, these are a long way from murder. Like, I don't understand. And if you've been watching Supernatural this whole time, you're like, that sounds familiar. Who could that be? So then it switches back to the motel. The SWAT team, they pause outside of this room, and then it goes back to Pete, and he's like, you're suspected of torturing and murdering a young woman. However, no one could prove anything, of course, because supposedly you died there. This is a reference to the episode with the shapeshifter, where it looked like Dean was murdering people, but it was a shapeshifter. We go back to the motel. The SWAT team breaks into the room, and there's this lead cop. Her name is Diana. She like runs in with a gun with the SWAT team, and it switches back to the police station, and Pete's like, but I gotta tell you something. You look pretty healthy to me. I'm like, okay, we get it. So now we know Karen Giles wasn't the first person that you murdered. Karen Giles is one of the people who has been murdered in this episode. It switches back to the motel. This woman.
Spoiler.
Sorry. It switches back to this woman, Diana, who's the other cop. She continues inside with the SWAT team. She lowers her gun. She's looking at somebody in the room, and she's like, going somewhere, Sam? It's giving very much Law and Order instead of your traditional Supernatural opening. And Sam is just looking back at her like deer in the headlights. It's very funny. And he looked back and he's like, he's got his like hands in the air. It's also very funny because he is like almost 7 feet tall. And he's like, huh?
Something I also want to say is that Diana, this cop, this female cop, she's a girl cop, #girl cop, is played by Linda Blair from The Exorcist, so that's just a fun fact, and they do reference it later. But I remember when she, like, the first scene where she shows up to arrest Sam, I'm like, oh my god, hey!
Yeah.
Hey, you! Hey,
yeah,
girl!
This is another instance of, like, randomly famous, really famous people being in Supernatural. Remember when Sterling K. Brown is just, like, randomly in it?
Yeah, I'm like, it's like, but at least for him, that was, like, before he really popped off.
Yeah.
For her, I'm like, girl, you were already famous.
Yeah. And it's funny because Sam and Dean, they reference The Exorcist all the time, so it's just like, okay, so canonically, how does that, okay. It's like
it's a fun little moment.
It's like the MCU, whenever, like, Spider-Man, like, talks about Star Wars, and I'm like, but you're friends with Samuel L. Jackson. Okay, all right.
I like the idea of they're just like, he's just like, wow, she looks a lot like that. She just looks a lot like the person from The Exorcist. No, because Dean Winchester watching This Is Us and being like, hey, that guy looks a lot like,
What? Dean Winchester watching This Is Us is so...
Yeah, he is like, I don't understand. I'm not crying. I'm not crying.
He's like,
shut up, Sam. I'm not crying.
I don't have daddy issues. I don't know what you're talking about. So, as you can tell, we're getting a very Law and Order vibe here. We're getting a very Criminal Minds vibe here. And Pete back at the police station is like, I guarantee it, but I guarantee it, she's the last. Like, she's the last person that you're gonna kill. And he walks away, and it pans to Dean, who turns to look at him, and Dean's like, he has this look on his face like, sure, Jan, and he's giving, like, the blue steel to the camera. It's like, Dean is like this shit-eating grin, basically, and you're like, what the fuck is happening? It is very wild. Is this where then they're like Supernatural? I feel like it is.
I do believe this is where the splash title comes on,
yes,
which is very exciting. Always my favorite part of the episode is when it shows the title. So I'm always like, oh my god, I forgot what show I was watching. It's Supernatural.
Yeah, that's our cold open. It is not someone random being murdered. So we come back and Sam is being interrogated in an interview room. He gets up. Diana, the other cop, she walks in. She's holding a cup of coffee. And she's like, thought you might be thirsty. And Sam's like, okay, so you're the good cop. Where's the bad cop? And of course, I'm like, so as you know, you're never supposed to touch or drink the things that the cops bring you because then they could bring DNA. But also, Samuel, you should not be speaking. You are a pre-law student who supposedly scored very high on your LSAT. You should know. You should shut the fuck up until a lawyer gets there.
No, literally.
Be silent.
Also, the fact that there is a part where Diana is like, didn't you know, I know everything about you because you're pre-law. And I'm like, Sam, you are flopping so hard. It's insane. Because, like, no, I was like, stop talking, Sam. Just stop. Just please, I'm begging you to just be quiet.
Yeah, so this whole episode's framing device, of like Sam telling the cop about like what's happening is predicated on the fact that he's an idiot who talks to the cops before having a lawyer. I don't know. Is it his white privilege? Is it him being an idiot? Who knows? This episode is
Those two are not mutually exclusive.
That's true. This episode is also predicated a lot on the patented Winchester white privilege that really makes this show go because they are Baltimore cops. So do with that what you will. So we're starting and he's like, so you're the good cop, where's the bad cop? And she's like, oh, he's with your brother. She's referring to Pete, the other cop that is basically her partner. And he's like, okay, like, you're holding us, why? And again, this whole time I'm like, Sam, shut the fuck up. And she's like, so he's being held on suspicion of murder, and you will see. Like, she's clearly trying to get him to crack. And Sam, he's the two of them, they're acting in this one. Because Sam, he like leans forward, and he's like, he looks really shocked, and he's like, murder? And she's like, well, you sound genuinely surprised, or are you that good of an actor? And you're like, damn, okay, this is crazy. And he's like, well, who is he supposed to have murdered? And she's like, we'll get to that. And he's like, well, you can't hold me here without any formal charges. And she's like, we can for 48 hours, but you being a pre-law student would know that. And I'm just like, damn, okay, Sam, you are flapping.
No, Sam is away from school for no, because I will say, as someone who's done quite a bit of college, when you go away for a break, when you come back, you feel like the dumbest person alive. Like, you don't know anything. You will, if you don't actively study, you will forget. So I do like the idea of Sam being like, he's like, yeah, I can take a gap year to go hunt demons and save my dad or whatever, and then comes back and is like, the First Amendment is something that's written down somewhere. I don't remember what it says.
He forgot his Miranda rights.
No, literally, that's how to be fair, that's how I feel coming back from, like, summer break. So I can't imagine how as long as Sam has been gone, how he's feeling.
But, like, all he had to do is watch a crime procedural to know, shut the fuck up and don't speak without a cop. He doesn't need school for that. Yeah. So they're trading jobs back and forth basically, and she's like, I know all about you. She opens this folder, she reads off all this stuff about Sam. She's like, you were a grade A, like, your mom died when you were this old. You were like, even though you moved around a lot, like, you were a really good student. You got a full ride at Stanford, like, you did really well, and then your girlfriend died and you suddenly, like, dropped off the mat and you left law school. And Sam's like, well, yeah, it was really traumatic and I needed some time off. And so I took a road trip with my brother. And she's like, and how's that going? And to me, I don't know why, but it did make me laugh. And he's like, great. It's very funny. It's, considering I know what happens, it's very funny
also,
to me.
The two of them interacting, it kind of pains me that Sam does not get to have these interactions with strong women more often.
Yeah.
Like, where, like, Sam having, like, an adversarial, like, debate with a smart woman is so...
He does with Rowena a lot.
That is true, but I think, like, especially early on, though, when it's, like, well written.
Yeah.
Sorry. Because, like, this, I was eating this up. I was like, this is so cunty.
Yeah, I was like, Sam, go off. So Sam's like, fine. Sam has been standing through all of this. Again, he's like 6 feet tall, and so he finally sits down, and he's like, yeah, it's been going really great. I saw the second largest ball of twine in the continent of the U.S. It was awesome. I'm like, Sam, you're laying it on a little thick here. And Diana's like, we ran Dean's fingerprints. We came up with all these hits, all these possible hits. And Sam's like, possible hits, which makes them worthless. Now he pulls out the law student shit.
He just needed a couple minutes for his brain to warm up.
Yeah, obviously. He would have done better as a tech bro. And she's like, it makes you wonder, what are you gonna find when I run your prints? And I'm like, okay, we get it. You're doing the routine. And he laughs and he's like, you be sure to let me know, all right? Like they're going back and forth. And he looks at the coffee and he's like, may I? And he picks it up. And then again, I'm screaming. I'm like, Sam, no, that's a tactic. Don't drink out of it. Don't touch it, you stupid ass. And she's like, you seem like a good kid. This is also where we are reminded that he is like, what, 22?
He is 20. He's 23. He is younger than both of us now, which is very scary to me.
I was like, oh, he's 22. And she's like, it's not your fault. Dean's your brother. We can't pick our family. And then, of course, I was reminded, I was like, and this is why gay people love this show. And also just a lot of shit that happens with that phrase later on. I'm like, damn, okay. She tells him that the detectives in St. Louis are looking at a corpse and trying to figure out how Dean faked his own death, and then tortured all these young women. Yeah. For a second, I was like, oh, that's a reference to like the last episode in Philadelphia, and I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. That was one of their cases in St. Louis. I forgot that one happened. And she's like, Dean's a bad guy, and I was like, aw, don't say that about him. He already feels like a bad guy. He's not a bad guy. Stop.
Yeah, I'm like, the homophobia jumped out. Why do you think Dean is a bad guy? Ignore the fact that you think he tortured a bunch of women, but it's probably because he's gay. That's probably why you're saying that, right?
Yeah.
Not for any of the other things like the grave desecration or the or whatever else they said at the beginning. It's got nothing to do with that, I'm sure.
So like Sam is finally shutting the fuck up at this point. And she's like, his life is over, but yours doesn't have to be. And at that point I did cry a little bit because I was like, oh, that's what happens.
No, literally. No. Again, I'm like, if any of this show was intentional, it would be such good writing.
I was like, oh no, I'm a little upset. Because also it does happen multiple times. Again, spoiler alert, sorry. I'm not sorry at all. This is a show you shouldn't watch. And Sam looks at her and he's like, so you want me to turn against my own brother? Which is so funny because that happens later on with like godly beings instead of cops. And she's like, no, actually, we already caught him at the murder scene. We already got his ass. We just need you to like fill in a few missing pieces. And Sam's like, why would I do that? And she's like, well, I can talk to the DA. I can make a deal for him. I can make a deal for you. We can at least make sure that he doesn't get the chair, basically.
Which is funny because at this point, Maryland did not have the death penalty, so...
The way you looked it up.
No, the way I knew. I was like, no. She was like... There's another part later where Dean's lawyer is like, you could be facing the death penalty. I'm like, bitch, what?
And I'm like, I'm according to Maryland law, actually.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, interesting.
Clearly, this was written by people in LA and filmed in Vancouver.
So true.
So she's like, Dean's as good as gone. And he's like, my dad and Tony Giles, who is the other person who was killed, they were old friends and they were in the service together and we've known them since we were kids, so we came here as soon as we heard about his death. Like, I don't know what you're trying to prove. And it flashes back to a memory, Sam's memory, which is kind of like the beginning of this case. So, and he's walking towards like a table at a restaurant. Dean is sitting there with a newspaper. He hands him his coffee and he's like, okay, there's this guy named Anthony Giles. He's this Baltimore lawyer. He was working late at his office. Look at this. And he's like, his throat was slit, but the room was clean. There was like nothing there. And he's like, there's no DNA, there's no prints, there's nothing. And the security cameras failed to capture the footage of the assailant. So like either someone tampered with the tapes or it's an invisible killer. And Dean's like, my favorite kind. And then of course they make a little X-Files joke. And he's like, what do you think, Scully? You want to check it out? And Sam's like, I'm not Scully. And he's like, no. And Dean's like, no, I'm Mulder. You're a redheaded woman.
No, because the fact that they're fighting over who gets to be Mulder, guys.
This is where, again, the sexism jumps out because they're like, I wouldn't want to be a woman.
Yeah, despite the fact that, like,
man.
Despite the fact that she is clearly the one that, the superior one. Sorry, X-Files stands. Sorry, any Mulder stands out there.
Yeah, and I do fear that Dean is the Scully. Not because he is superior, just but like, just personality wise. This is one of those moments where you go, and who was this show written for? It gets weird. So the flashback ends. We go back to the police station, and Sam is like, so it would have been pretty hard for Dean to kill Tony because we weren't in town at that time. And Diana, the cop, is like, okay, so what happened next? And Sam's like, well, that's when we went to go see Karen, who is the other person who was killed. She was, like, really sad, and we just wanted to be there for her. Then we get to another flashback. At this point, we're basically going through, like, Sam telling the story and them showing what actually happened. But at this point, you're like, Sam, shut up. Be quiet. So we're in another memory of Sam's, and we see Karen. She's looking at insurance papers, and she's like, oh my God, I totally forgot about the insurance. She's crying. Sam and Dean are sitting next to her. They're wearing suits. They are pretending to be insurance adjusters. And I'm like, okay, you guys with your little stories. And he's like, Sam's like, we're really sorry to bother you right now. It's a really sad time. The company has to do our own investigation. I hope you understand. You know, he's doing his, like, Sam, very understanding, like, thing. And she's like, okay. And he's like, just tell me anything you remember about the night your husband died. And she's like, well, Tony and I were supposed to have dinner. And then he called. He said he was having some computer trouble. He had to work late. And that was it. And he's like, do you have any idea like who could have done this to him? And she's like, no. She's like, I told the police, like, I have no idea. And then Dean, who does this all the time, is like, did Tony mention anything unusual to you in the days before his death? And she's like, unusual? And he's like, yeah, like strange. And you know, like, weird, like, noises, visions, anything like that. And Sam's like, dude, what the fuck? And Dean's like, I'm trying. And I'm like, guys, you are not subtle. You're not. It's so dark.
They're not subtle, but Dean does get results.
Yeah, he does get results. I'll say that. And she's like kind of confused. And she's like, okay, well, he had this nightmare the day before that he died. And he's like, and Sam's like, oh, can you tell us about it? And she's like, okay. And she's like, well, he woke up in the middle of the night. He said there was this woman standing at the foot of his bed. And then he blinked and she was gone. And it was just a nightmare. And Dean was like, well, did he say what she looked like? And she's like, why would that matter? And Dean's like, our company is very thorough. It's very funny. He's struggling. And she was like, I don't know. He said she was pale and she had, like, dark red eyes. So we flash back to the police station and Sam is back to telling the story. And he's like, I gave Karen a hug. I told her to call me if she needed anything. That was it. End of story. And obviously the cop, she's still trying to do her whole thing. She's like, Sam, I'm trying to help you. Like, but she's getting agitated, and she's like, but you have to be honest with me. We have an eyewitness. We saw someone saw two men who look like you guys breaking in to Tony Giles' office. And he's like, yeah. So Sam is like, yeah, so Karen called us later, and she said there was some really sentimental stuff that she wanted us to get from Tony's office, but the police weren't letting her in, like pictures of the two of them in Paris and stuff like that. You know, it was obviously, it was wrong of us to enter a crime scene, but like she gave us the key and we really just wanted to help her. Like Sam has this lie like down pat, clearly. We go back to the flashback, and Sam and Dean, they are picking the lock to get into Tony's office, the crime scene, to enter the room. Sam shines a flashlight on this like patch of blood on the floor, and Dean's like, okay, this is where they found the body. He was like, the throat was slit so deep that part of the spinal cord was visible. And Dean's like, what the hell? Like, is it a vengeful spirit? Is it like, and he's like, okay, it had to be really vengeful. And he's like, yeah, I mean, he saw that woman at the end of his bed. So Dean picks up this piece of paper off of the desk, and he looks at it and he gives it to Sam, and he's like, Sam, like, look at this. It says Dana Schultz over and over and over, like typed and printed over and over. And Sam's like, is it a name? Like, is it a play? Like, what is it? And Dean starts looking around. He's like, oh, it's everywhere. And like, there's another paper that says that. Then Dean says, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And I'm like, who speaks like this? Who speaks like this? Who is writing his dialogue? Like, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes you're like, no one talks like this in real life. So
yeah, this is it's again like every so often this show will have a moment where someone will say something and I'm like, okay, now explain quickly.
You're like, huh? So the guy's desk is a glass table, and Sam notices some smudges. So he shines a flashlight on it, and he like breathes on it a little bit, and it fogs it up, and then written on the table in the smudges is Dana Schultz. And Sam's like, okay, so we've crossed over into weird. And I'm like, you work with ghosts every day. It's always weird. How is this the weirdest thing you've seen? I'm sorry. What? And Dean's like, I don't know. Maybe this Giles guy knew her, or someone named that. And Sam's like, I don't know. Maybe that's the name of the like pale woman that they saw. And Dean's like, okay, well, let's look around and find out. And he starts like sifting through all the files that they have, and he's like, let's see what we can find. It's like hours later. Dean is like throwing papers around, and he's looking, and he's like, there's no mention of like a Dana Schultz. Like there's nothing. And Sam is sitting at the computer, and he's like, type, I'm in. Oh, also Sam still has the wrist brace on, which is from Jared Padalecki's like actual injury, which we talked about in last week's episode. That like he actually injured himself, and so like Sam has this injury in the show that like was never explained. It's very funny.
I do like it being like Anakin getting his scar between episode 2 and episode 3, where it's like, oh, there must be some like deep meaning, and then all of the fans are like, it's probably because he cut himself trying to shave or do something stupid. Like Sam was like, I think it'd be funny if it's like, oh, well, Sam hurt himself during this thing. No, Sam hurt himself because he tripped on the curb and busted his ass. That's my headcanon.
He just fell down the stairs. Like, I don't know. They do get thrown against walls a lot in this show, so like it's very plausible. But yeah, so he's like typing with his little wrist brace at the computer, and he's very like hacker voice, I'm in this scene. It's very funny. And he's like, okay, so there's no mention of a Dana Schultz like anywhere. He's like, there's not a D Schultz, any kind of Schultz, like, you know, there's no Dana Schultz ever lived or died in Baltimore in the last like 50 years. And Dean's like, so what now? And Sam is like, well, I'm pretty close to cracking his password. And I'm like, wait, if you couldn't get in, if you didn't have the password to get in, how were you searching for things on the computer? You know what? It doesn't make sense.
I thought that same thing, and I thought I was crazy, so I'm happy you brought it up.
I'm like, okay. I'm like, and you didn't, like, do you have, like, code breaker, like, software? Like, or it's usually, okay, all right, fine.
Sam is just typing random numbers, and he's like, eventually, he's like, if you give me 30 more minutes, I will enter every single possible combination of letter and number.
Yeah, he's like, I'm in.
He's just a really fast typer.
Yeah, even with his little, you know, wrist brace. And he's like, all right, give me like 30 minutes. And Dean's like, okay, well, I've already looked through all of his personal files. And Dean's like, I'm bored. And he's kind of being like a little asshole, and he's kind of like being like, I'm bored. And then Sam's like, can you get your shit together and stop bothering me? I need to do this. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to go talk to Karen again. I'm going to find out if she knows anything about somebody named Dana Schultz. And Sam was like, great, bye. And he says, keep going, Sparky. Again, no one speaks like this. You know what? That's what Supernatural is about. Them saying words and catchphrases that no real human being would say. So we go back to the police station, which is the current day. Sam's like, yeah, Dean went back to Karen's place to check on her. She'd been pretty upset. And the cop's like, so why didn't you go with him? And he's like, I just went back to the motel because I was tired. How did you know? And he was like, how did you know I was there? And she's like, oh, well, I looked in the motel matchbook, and that was on Dean when they arrested him. And she's like, let's stop fooling around. She was like, you were with your brother the whole time. You were in Baltimore. Why did you separate? Because your brother left you to go murder Karen. Seems like he didn't kill anybody. And she's like, I heard the 911 call, and Karen was terrified, and she said someone was in her house. So then we flash back to Karen is sitting on her couch. She's watching TV. She sees someone like walk by in the hallway, and she's like, huh? And she looks up. She sees someone standing in the window of her other room. She's like, holy shit. Starts screaming. Turns on the light, and the person is gone. And she's like, oh my God. She gets up. She's like walking down the hallway. She's like,
also, we do see this person, and it is definitely not either of our homeboys.
Yeah, no.
It is definitely like a woman.
Yeah, it is a blonde-haired woman that we see for like a hot second. And she's like freaking out. She's running through the house. She locks herself in her room upstairs. She picks up the phone. She calls 911. She's like, hi, there's somebody in my house. I don't know, whatever. And they're like, okay, like, give us your address, whatever. And then she starts to, and then the phone dies. And so all she was able to say was like, I'm scared and there's someone in my house. The lights go out, and then she must be like in her office or something, because her printer or fax machine starts printing off something by itself. And she's like, she goes over, she looks at it, and of course it says Dana Schultz, Dana Schultz, Dana Schultz, like over and over and over again. And she goes in her closet, and she's like, she turns around, and there is this woman, this ghost with red eyes standing behind her, and she screams. And this woman is like fucked up and dead with like blonde hair and this huge like cut across her neck. Outside, Dean is knocking on her door, and he's like calls her name, and he's like, she doesn't answer, and he kind of like looks around, he's like, okay, fine, and he picks the lock and breaks into her house. I'm like, Dean, not your smartest move, but okay.
Also, Dean is literally never wearing gloves at any point when he's like, I'm gonna break into someone's house. I'm like, dude, if you had some freaking latex gloves in your back pocket, everything would be so much easier for everyone.
Like, you guys are around crime scenes, avoiding cops, pretending you're dead, and like all the time around murders, all the time. Why are you leaving your prints everywhere? Every time he touched something, I was like, stop. The two of them. Between that and Sam not shutting up in front of a cop, I was like, you guys are the dumbest people alive. you watch one procedural.
No, because you know what? Jo Harvell would never make this mistake.
Yeah, Jo Harvell would never. She would never.
No, she would probably make another mistake, but not this one.
Yeah. Also, when they become friends with like Jody later on, I bet she makes fun of them. She's like, "You guys are dumb." So he breaks in, no gloves, nothing. And he goes inside, he looks around, he tries to turn on the lights, they're not working. He's like, goes upstairs, he's trying to find her, and he sees her lying on the floor, and he's like, oh no. And there's a pool of blood around her throat is cut, and he's like, oh my god. And he finds the paper that was printed that says Dana Schultz on it, and he's like, what the hell is this? And he crouches down next to her, and he lifts up her hand. I'm like, again, stop touching in the murder scene. Stop! You're so dumb.
And he lifts it up, and he gets like blood on his hand. I'm like, dude,
you're the dumbest man alive. And he notices these like red marks on her wrist. And of course, then you hear like freeze, and there's a voice behind him. He turns around, there's two cops, they're pointing guns at him. They're like, stay on your knees. They arrest him, and he's like, ah, shit. And he puts up his hands, they handcuff him, they hold the whole thing. So basically, they have caught him with literal blood on his hands at the scene of the crime. So we cut back to the present. It is the police station. Dean is sitting behind a two-way mirror. He's handcuffed to a table, and Pete, the other cop, is sitting inside. And Diana, who was talking to Sam, comes in, and she's like, you getting anywhere with him? And Pete is like, no, just a lot of like wise ass remarks, which is, yeah, that's Dean for you. And he's like, you know
what? I'd rather wise ass remarks than being like, no, you can't hold me, and giving like showing his whole ass like Sam.
Stupid ass. I'm also like, Dean, shut up. Wait for your lawyer, dumbass. And she's like, no, Sam's story matches Dean's to the last detail. And I'm like, John trained you boys well, huh? But also I'm wondering like when they were able to coordinate that story with each other. Because there really wasn't a time they could have.
They just knew.
Yeah.
They're just slaying.
Yeah, they're brother to brother communication. And he's like, these guys are good. I'll give them that. And she's like, you know, if we don't get Sam to flip, we don't really have anything. We just have circumstantial evidence. And they walk out into the hallway, and he's like, we got Dean at the crime scene. There's blood on his hands. Juries have convicted for less. I was like, damn, okay, Baltimore cop. No,
it really is. This episode, I'm like, you really are giving Baltimore.
Yeah.
Not truly, because no one said Washington or anything.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Didn't, talk about eat Bertha's muscles or anything.
Yeah. They weren't like...
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Baltimore, I'm so sorry to do this to you. So, he goes out in the hall. I was like, okay, the commentary here. So, and then she turns to him, and she's like, okay, but where's, like, the murder weapon? Like, what's the motive? Like, you know, there's, like, reasonable doubt. And he's like, Diana, like, do you have a reasonable doubt? And he, like, puts a hand up to her face. They're, like, on the side of the hallway. They're by, like, a vending machine. And he puts, like, a hand up to her face. And then another cop walks by, and he, like, takes his hand down. And he's like, we just keep leaning on these guys. One of them will tumble. And you're like, oh, my God. Okay. All right. We're doing the cop procedural now. Okay. And he's like, don't forget about St. Louis. I'm telling you, this Dean guy is our guy. Because they're like, okay, he's been caught in other places. Like, it's got to be him. And Diana's like, listen, I know that you knew Tony Giles. He was a friend of yours. And he's like, yeah, he was a really good friend of mine. And she's like, I know you want to clean this mess up really quick, but, like, you know, Tony was a lawyer. He knew a lot of criminal types. Maybe he just, and P starts laughing, and he's like, criminal types? He was a defense lawyer. Like, yeah, that's his job. Of course he knew criminal types. And she's like, okay, I'm going to go back to the brothers. He's like, no, let them stew in their juices for a bit. That was quite the choice of words. And then he looks around and then he kisses her, and I'm like, workplace sexual harassment.
No, because it's clear that they like have a relationship, but I'm also like, now why are you kissing at work?
Yeah, I would be killing them myself. And then so she leaves. We cut back to like Dean's interview room. He is sitting there and he's whispering to himself and he's like, Dana Schultz, what is that? We cut to Sam. He has a piece of paper and he's writing Dana Schultz on it, and he's like, I don't know what it is. And then we cut to Dean again and he's like, okay, wait, what if it's not a name? And then we cut to Sam, and Sam's like, what if it's an anagram? So clearly they're on brother-to-brother communication. They're not even speaking to each other, and they're whatever. This is to show how in sync they are. And Sam starts to try to figure out the anagram, and he's writing it out a bunch of different ways. We go back to Dean. He's trying to figure out the anagram in his head. And then a man comes through the door, and he's like, Mr. Winchester, and the man's like, hi, I'm your public defender. And Dean's like, oh, thank God I'm saved. And I was like, Dean, don't be mean. Like, you know, you're the one who won't shut up before your lawyer gets here. And also, like, I bet there are better hunters who have, like, a whole plan set in place that they, like, have a lawyer on retainer for, like, if they run into issues with the law because they're pretending to be the law all the time. Like, these two are idiots and are never prepared for anything. I bet somebody like Bobby, like, has somebody, like, you know, who is a lawyer who knows about monsters and stuff like that. I'm like, you two are dumb. So, like, don't complain that you have to use a public defender. I'm just saying. And he's like, hey, can I have a piece of paper and a pen? And he starts, like, writing down Dana Schultz in, like, different ways. And the lawyer's like, hey, like, we have to, like, talk about your case. And Dean's like, he's not listening, and he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I think it's an anagram. And he's writing, and the lawyer's like, what's an anagram? Like, what? And Dean is like, an anagram, same letters, different words. He pushes, like, the paper, and he's like, here, like, look at it, see if you recognize any of these words. Are they names? Are any of them, like, local places? And the lawyer is like, do you, like, realize how serious these charges are? And, like, Dean says, I'm handcuffed to a table. Yeah, I get it. Humor me. And I'm like, Dean, okay, I admire the balls, I guess. And the guy's like, okay, well, this one, other than, like, the extra letters, that says Ashland. And Dean starts, he's like, this is a local street. It's not far away from here. He's like, let's get back to the case. And Dean is like, can I see my brother? And he's like, you could be facing the death penalty. Again, this is...
Once again, no, you're not.
Yeah. And Dean's like, thank you for the law review, Matlock. Again, Dean, shut up. He's trying to help you. But if you want to help me, I need to see my brother. I need you to go see my brother. And he gives the piece of paper to the lawyer. We cut to, like, in the like, main floor of, like, the police station. Diana, one of the cops, is sitting at her computer. She's typing up the case report. She's, like, writing her notes. And suddenly, the words Dana Schultz start appearing on her screen, and she's not typing them, and it appears over and over, and she's like, she tries to, like, Control-Alt-Delete it doesn't work, and then suddenly it's gone, like it wasn't, and she's like, huh, and then it's gone. We cut back to Sam, and the lawyer is there. He has given Sam the note, and he's looking at it, and it says, Hiltz, it's a street, Ashland, McQueen. And the lawyer's like, I hope that was meaningful, but can we, like, talk about your case, please? And Sam's like, sure thing, Matlock.
They really said, and just in case you forgot, they're brothers.
And then the lawyer's like, you two really are brothers, aren't you? They're like the sisters. That's them. That's a reference to the musical White Christmas, if anybody. Anyway. I'm not gonna say what I was gonna say. So Sam starts to like be like, okay, I'm gonna talk about my case, and then Diana comes in and she's like, hey, we need you to the lawyer with the other one. And then we get to Dean's interview room, and there's a bunch of people. They've set up a camera in front of Dean. Diana, the other cop, and the lawyer walk in, and Pete, the other cop, is like, counselor, your boy has decided to confess. And the lawyer, it's like, hi, Dean, I really advise against that. Please do not. And Dean he doesn't say anything, and Pete is talking directly into the camera. He's like, state your name for the record. And Dean goes, this is an iconic line that was used quite a lot on Tumblr. This is an iconic Dean Winchester moment. He looks right at the camera and he's like, my name is Dean Winchester. I'm an Aquarius. I was like, that's something a gay person would say. I'm an Aquarius. I enjoy sunsets, long walks on the beach, and frisky women. That sounds like a man who's trying really hard to sound like he's not gay.
He said, what do men say when they want to attract a woman?
He's like, I like women. He says, I did not kill anyone, but I know who did, or rather what did. Of course, I can't say for sure because our investigation was interrupted, but our working theory is that we're looking for some kind of vengeful spirit. And Diana, the cop, is like, excuse me? And he's like, Casper, the bloodthirsty ghost. There's so many lines in this. You're like, oh my God. And he's like, Tony Giles saw it. I'll bet you cash money Karen did too. But see, the interesting thing is that the word it leaves behind, for some reason, it's trying to tell us something. But communicating across the veil isn't easy. Sometimes the spirits, they get things jumbled. He's like, you remember red rum, same concept. It could be word fragments. Other times it's an anagram. And he pulls out the piece of paper and where he wrote Dana Schultz in all the different ways. And he's like, first we thought this was a name, Dana Schultz. And Diana's looking in shock at the paper. She's like, oh my God, that just happened to me. But now we think it's a street, Ashland. Whatever's going on, I'm betting that it started there. And he smiles, and the other cop, Pete, is like, you arrogant bastard. And he's like, Tony and Karen were good people. You're making a joke. Dean's like, I'm not joking, Paunch. Who speaks like this? Pete, the cop, here is where we see some overt police brutality against Dean Winchester. Pete literally gets up, walks around the table, and he's like, you murdered them in cold blood, just like that girl in St. Louis. And Dean's like, oh, yeah, that wasn't me. That was a shapeshifter creature that only looked like me. And Dean looks into the camera and he smiles. And then Pete, the cop, yanks him out of the chair and shoves him up against a wall. And I'm like, you're doing this on camera. Okay, all right. Diana, the other cop, yells at him and she's like, that's enough. And Dean's like, well, I mean, you asked for the truth. And Pete leaves and he's like, lock him back up. We cut to Sam's interview room. Diana and Pete, they go into the room and they find Sam is gone. And they're like, where did he go? And they find that the window is open. They're like, the fire escape is not even close to here. Like, how did this happen? And like, weird that you'd have a window in an interview room, but okay. And Diana looks at the paper and she's like, man, these two guys. And she's kind of laughing and they look at the note and it says Hilton McQueen. What is that? And she's like, Hiltz is Steve McQueen's character in The Great Escape. So they were talking to each other in code. And I'm like, all right, that's kind of awesome slay, Dean. Very well done. We cut to the bathroom in the police station. Diana walks in. She tries to turn on the lights, but they are like flickering. And she's like, what's going on? Suddenly all of the water, all the taps of the water turn on and start pouring hot water and fogging up all the mirrors. And she turns around to see that someone is drawing the letters of Dana Schultz into the fog on the mirrors. And she's like, what? And she wipes it away with her hand, and then she sees the reflection of that woman behind her with her throat slit. And she turns around, and the woman like comes closer to her, like walks up to her, and she's making like these gargly creepy noises, and she's trying to speak and she can't, and there's like blood coming out of the cut on her neck, and it's very whatever, but she's like clearly trying to talk to her. We cut to Dean in his interview room, and Diana, she goes into the room. Dean is sitting there. He's like rubbing in his eyes, and he's like, "Can we like make this quick? Like, I'm tired. It's been a long day. Your partner assaulted me." I was like, "Yeah, okay." And Diana just goes, "I want to know more about that stuff you were talking about earlier."
It's like, "Miss Girl, what are you?" Okay, interesting.
And
I did just got hurt very bad by your little buddy there, so
yeah.
Okay.
And Dean just goes, "Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown. Look it up." Again, he's talking in so many references. It's like he's like a walking toy. It's so weird. And so Diana's like, "Okay, so let's pretend that you're not crazy. What would one of those things be doing here?" And Dean's like, "A vengeful spirit?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, they're created by violent deaths, and they come back for a reason, usually a really bad one, and they take revenge on the people that hurt them." And she's like, "These spirits, they're capable of like killing people in real life." And she like starts to like lift up her hand and start rubbing her neck anxiously, and Dean starts to like smile, and then he stops, and he's like, "Where'd you get those?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And she pulls up her sleeves, and there are these red marks on her wrists, just like the one that like Karen had on hers when she was dead. She's like, "I don't know, it wasn't there before." And he's like, "You've seen it, you've seen the spirit." And she's like, "How did you know?" And he's like, "'Cause Karen had the same bruises on her wrists, I saw it. And I'm willing to bet if you look at Giles' autopsy photos, he has them too. It has to do with the spirit. I don't know what it is." And he's like, "I know you're going you think you're going crazy, but like let's skip that for a second, and just like the last two people who saw this thing, they died really soon after. So," and Diana's like, "You think I'm gonna die?" And he's like, "You need to go to Sam. He'll help you." And she's like, "You're giving your brother up? Like, you're leading me to your brother?" And he's like, "Okay, just go to the first motel listed in the yellow pages." Woo, 2006 is calling. Look for Jim Rockford. It's how we find each other when we're separated. Now you can arrest him if you want, or you can let him save your life. Also, what do you guys do in later seasons when there's not really a yellow pages anymore?
Modern times. I don't know. That's a great question.
So we cut to the motel room. Sam is like, he's looking at some papers. He hears a knock on the door. He opens it. He sees Diana. She's standing there. He looks at her wrists, and he's like, "Did those show up after you saw it?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, you need to tell me exactly what you saw." And she's like, I think I'm losing my mind." She's like, "You're a fugitive. I need to be arresting you." And he's like, "Cool, you can arrest me later, after you live through this, but right now, like, you know, you have to tell me what happened." What did she look like? So Diana tells, like, she's like, "This is exactly what she looked like. Her throat was cut. She was trying to talk to me. There was just like so much blood." And Sam's like, "Okay, I've been researching every girl who's ever died or gone missing from Ashland Street." And she's like, "How did you get all of this shit?" And there's all these like crime scene and booking photos on the table. And he's like, "You have your job and I have mine." I'm like, that's an interesting response, Sam.
He said, "Girl, what more do you need to know quickly?"
He's like, she looks at the photos and she finds this one girl that she recognizes, and she's like, "This is her. I know it is." And she gives him the picture. It's this blonde girl. It's a booking photo. And does Claire Becker, 28 years old, disappeared 8 or 9 months ago. She's like, I don't even know her. Why would she come after me? And he's like, well, before her death, she was arrested twice for dealing heroin. Have you ever worked narcotics? And she's like, yeah, like Pete and I, my partner, we did before we worked homicide. And he's like, did you ever bust her? And she's like, no, I don't remember anybody who looked like that. And he's like, okay, well, the police never found her body, so we have to check it out, see if we can find her body. And I'm like, Sam, you're very confident. If they didn't find her body, how do you think you're gonna find it? But okay. And Diana's like, what? We have to find her body? And he's like, yeah, we have to like salt and burn her bones. And, you know, it's the only way to like put her spirit to rest. And Diana's like, of course it is. So we are now on Ashland Street. Sam and Diana, they are searching through this abandoned building. Again, I don't really know how they like figured out to go there, to be honest. This woman's name is Claire. She was last seen entering there. She's like, what are we looking for? And he's like, well, I'll let you know like when we find it, because I'm not really sure. They split up, and Diana hears something behind her as she's walking around. She turns around, and there's Claire. There's the ghost. The ghost starts like coming towards her, and it's reaching out to her, and Diana's like, oh, Sam. And he like comes by, but by the time he gets there, the ghost is gone. She was like, she was over there. She was by the window. And they like move a shelf, and they see this window. And on the other side of the window is written Ashland, and underneath is only part of a word, sup. And basically it's like stickers. It's like old stickers on the window that then when they're reflected backwards, when you look at the reflection on the wall across when there's light shining on it, it clearly says like Ashland, like supermarket, and clearly just the sup was left. And those were the mystery like letters. It's very yes and slay little puzzle. And Diana's like, oh, it's our mystery word. And Sam, he takes out his little EMF meter, and he's like, and she's like, what is that? And he's like, it's a thing because spirits, they leave residual electromagnetic fields. Like, oh, I have to explain everything to you. And he finds a signal like inside a wall near them, and he breaks the wall with a crowbar, and he's like, okay, there's definitely something inside. And he's like, you know, there's something about this that's bothering me. And she's like, well, we're digging up a corpse, so yeah. And he's like, oh, no, that's it. We actually do that all the time.
He's like, oh, no, that's kind of slay. I love doing that. That's fun.
And she's like, huh? And she's like, so what's bothering you? And he's like, I mean, vengeful spirits don't usually want to be, like, put to rest. They usually fight you. So why would she lead us to her remains? It doesn't really make sense. And they finally break open the wall, and there is a body in a bag. And they take it out. It's very graphic. And Sam cuts this rope, and they unwrap it, and there's this body inside. It literally looks like a skeleton that they put a blonde wig on. It's very funny.
I mean, to be fair, it's kind of nasty because like it does look like you know, like a corpse. Like, it does have skin.
Yeah.
It's just, like, dried. It's very nasty.
Yeah, but, like, with a blonde wig. It's very...
yeah, like... she does have a full head of hair. I'm like, okay, so true.
Yeah. And Diana's like, oh, her wrists are tied. And he's like, yeah, they would be bruised just like yours. And then they see this necklace on her. And Diana picks it up, and she's like, oh, my God, I've seen one just like this. They're really rare, and they're custom made at this place on Carson Street. And she pulls it out, and she's like, I have one. Pete gave it to me. And Sam's like, oh, now this makes sense. And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, so Claire isn't a vengeful spirit. She's a death omen. And she's like, well, what the fuck does that mean? And she's like, she's not killing anyone. She's trying to warn them. So sometimes the spirits, they don't want vengeance. They want justice. And, you know, why is she here in the first place? Which is why she's here in the first place. She wants us to know who her killer is. And he's like, detective, like, how much do you know about your partner? And then Diana thinks for a second. She's like, oh my God. About a year ago, there was some heroin that went missing from our lockup. And obviously it was a cop. We never found out who did it. But whoever did it would need someone to fence their product. And Sam's like, yeah, somebody like a heroin dealer like Claire. And they're like, ah, shit. We cut to being on the road in a van. Pete is driving a van down the road at night with Dean in the back. And Dean's like, hey, why would you yourself decide to transfer me to St. Louis at 2:00 in the morning? And Pete doesn't answer. And Dean's like, well, this can't be good. We cut to Diana. She hangs up her phone. She's like, Pete just left with Dean in a cop van. And Sam's like, what? And she's like, yeah, that he said that the prisoner had to be transferred and he just took him. And the dispatch has been calling and he won't answer. On the radio. And Sam's like, on the radio, he took a county vehicle? And she's like, yeah. And Sam's like, kind of an idiot, but okay. And he's like, oh, well, if it's a county vehicle, like, they have a low jack. You can just use it to track him.
Yeah. Sam's like, okay, flop, anyway.
Sam's like, please, we got this.
Sam's pre-law degree is slowly worming its way back into his head.
Yeah. So Pete like pulls off the road. At this point, I'm laughing because I'm like, oh, they are on 495. Actually, at this point, they're on 95 because they're on 95.
Yeah, they're going to. Yeah.
Like, so.
Also, what part of 95? There are parts of 95 that look like that where you're like, this feels like a road that is way more separated from everything else than it actually is. Like,
yeah.
You pull off and there is a Wawa. Like,
yeah.
I guarantee that this scene takes place within 15 minutes of a Wawa.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Pete pulls off of 95, basically. Stops the van. He gets out of the van. He, like, pulls Dean out, and he's, like, throwing him to the ground. And Dean is, like, making jokes about, like, oh, well, you know, I can just, like, pee in a cup or whatever. Like, we don't have to stop, whatever. But, like, Dean is clearly joking through a very traumatic experience happening to him. As this cop kidnaps him. And Pete's like, the people in St. Louis, they're not ever gonna buy your story. You're not gonna make it to St. Louis. You're gonna die trying to escape. And he pulls out a gun, and Dean's like, whoa. Let's talk about this. Like, you don't want to do something you, like, regret. And he's like, well, okay, maybe you do. And then we hear Diana, and she yells, like, Pete, and they turn around. Diana and Sam are there. Diana is pointing a gun at Pete, and she's like, put the gun down. And he's like, how did you find me? And she's like, I know about Claire. And Pete's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, put the gun down. And he's like, I won't be doing that. You're fast, but I am faster. And she's like, why did you do it? And he's like, I didn't do anything. And she's like, it's a little late for you to, like, be denying this. And he's like, it wasn't my fault. Claire was going to turn me in. I had no choice. And she's like, what about Tony and Karen? And he's like, well, same thing. Tony was the one who scrubbed the money. And then he got skittish. And he wanted to come clean. And I'm sure he told Karen, his wife, everything. And it was a mess. And I had to clean it up. And I panicked. And Diana's like, how many more people are going to die over this? Like, how many more people were involved? And he's like, there's a way out. This Dean kid, and it was just so funny because he's like 26 at this point. This Dean kid's a friggin' gift. I just, sometimes I love how they speak in this show. And he's like, we could pin the whole thing on him. No trial. Just like one more dead scumbag. And you're like, whoa, this has gotten quite dark. And Dean's like, hey!
Hey.
Hey. And Pete, like, aims the gun at him again. And he's like, no one's gonna question it. And he's like, Diana, I still love you. And she, like, lowers her gun. And he's like, thank you. And he turns towards Dean. And he turns toward him. And then suddenly she shoots him. And Dean, like, rolls out of the way. And she goes, why don't you buy me another necklace, you ass? I was like, damn, okay. And he jumps on her, Pete. and Sam like tries to come help her, and Pete like aims the gun at him, and he's like, don't do it, like don't come any closer, and instead of aiming it at Sam, he aims it at Dean. And they're like, shit, and they like put their hands up, and then Diana looks behind Pete, and Claire, the ghost, is standing there. And then Pete turns around and he sees her, and then Diana shoots him from behind, and she actually gets him this time. It's very crazy.
Also very dark.
Very dark.
Which I know it's taking place on 95, which has no street lights. So, you know, it makes sense that it'd be dark, but...
Yeah. So she's kneeling beside his body, and Dean and Sam, and she walks over to them, and and Sam's like, are you okay? And she's like, no, not really. And she's like, what about the death omen? Like, what about Claire? Like, what happens to her spirit? And he's like, it should be over. Like, she should be at rest. And Dean's like, so what now, officer? And she's like, well, Pete confessed to me. He screwed up both your cases. But there's a good chance, like, we can get both of your cases dismissed. And Sam's like, oh, well, you take care of that for us? And she's like, well, I hope so. But, like, the St. Louis murder charge, that's another story. And I can't help you. And she's like, unless I just happen to turn my back and you walk away, and I could tell them that the suspects escaped. And Sam's like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah. And no. And Dean's like, yeah, she's sure, Sam. No. And he's like, well, no, it's just like you could lose your job over something like that. And she's like, look, I want you guys to be out there doing what you do best. I will sleep better at night. Basically knowing that there's crazy shit out there that she can't do anything about. And she's like, but you need to like watch your back, because they're going to be looking for you actively now. She's like, get out of here. I'm gonna go radio this in. And Dean's like, okay, one slight little thing. Do you know where my car is? And she's like, it's at this impound lot on Robertson. Like, come on. And she's like, don't even think about asking me for help with this. And Sam's like, oh, it's okay. We'll just improvise. We're pretty good at that. And she's like, yeah, I've noticed. And then we hear the best line in the whole thing. Sam goes, nice lady. And Dean goes, yeah, for a cop. And I was like, yeah.
No, literally, Dean was like, all right, Sam, no, I heard that you were a dum-dum and just talked the entire time in your little interview, so...
He's like, our father fought in Vietnam. He hates cops. Nah, fuck him.
Yeah. You're done.
Yeah, and he's like, fuck America, for real. No, I'm projecting. I fear that Dean's political practice is not that good.
It's not great, but I fear he's leaning less in the like leftist ACAB and more in the libertarian, I don't want cops to bother me way.
Yeah. This is also where the Exorcist reference is, where he's like, did she look a little familiar to you? And Sam's like, no. Why? He's like, I don't know. Anyway, are you hungry? And Sam is like, he's like, for some reason I could really go for some pea soup. And then it ends there with them walking, and
which is so foul, because it's like a reference to the fact that in The Exorcist when she throws up it looks like pea soup. I'm like, that is so foul to me.
I'm like, they were waiting to do that the whole time.
No, I'm also like, is that the best they could come up with? That's the best Exorcist reference, like best reference to her character. Boo, tomato.
It's so dark. Also, apparently, the Jim Rockford reference is a reference to the lead character in a 1970s detective show, The Rockford Files. So everything they fucking say is a reference. I didn't know that because I'm not cultured enough. This one was like, how many references can we put in? We got The X-Files, we got The Shining, we got Casper the Friendly Ghost, we got The Great Escape.
Like, just a little too excited, I think.
I was like, guys, that episode is very detail heavy, so it was really hard to like, okay, so just do this and this and this and this.
Yeah, this one is not the same.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready?
I am ready, love. Yeah. Oh, the opening of this episode. So good.
Yes. So, let us talk about Season 2, Episode 8, Crossroad Blues. This episode is iconic. It is just... It sets up so much lore in the supernatural universe, and there are so many things in this episode alone that I'm like, okay, it is crazy.
They really popped off with this one.
They popped off. Also, the cinematography of this episode fucks.
Yeah.
It goes hard. So let's get into it. The episode starts, and it's this low-lit bar. It's 1938. So so it's like a roadside bar. And there's this man, he's black, he has a cigarette in his mouth. And he's playing his guitar, and he's very, very talented. And there's a young woman in the audience, and, like, it's mostly black patrons, just to keep in mind. And we hear this kind of, like, shuffling and this kind of growling sound, and he keeps getting distracted, and he stops playing. The growling stops, so he's like, okay. He keeps playing, but every couple seconds he hears this, like, growling, and when he stops playing, all of the people look kind of confused, and this young woman in the audience, like, looks confused. So he's like, okay, whatever. So he stops playing one time because he hears it, and then he sees a dark shadow dash by the window. His cigarette falls out of his mouth, and he runs out the door. His guitar's still in his hand. He's sprinting down this dark road. He drops his guitar, and he, like, gets into his home, and he closes the door and bolts it shut. And he's, like, pushing a chair under the doorknob, but the chair does not, like, hold, and the door breaks open. And then the young woman and two other men from the bar rush in, and they find him having some kind of seizure. Like, he's, like, freaking out, he's shaking. And the young woman runs up and is like, oh my god, stay with me, stay with me. And as he is, like, dying, he whispers to her, black dogs. And then he kind of flops back and dies. And then we get the title card, Supernatural. So it's a really interesting thing. This is one of the few times where it opens with almost like a period moment.
Yeah.
So it's always exciting to see. So then we hop back forward. It's the present day. Sam and Dean are sitting at this, like, diner, and Sam's on his laptop, and he's like, okay, well, Dean, I know we were trying to lay low, but, you're actually on the Fed's database now. And Dean's like, oh my god, bitch, are you fucking kidding? That's hilarious. I'm famous, basically. I feel like I'm, like, in a movie. And Sam's like, okay, cool, it's not funny. We have to be careful. And Dean's like, oh, so what do they have on you? What have they posted about you? And Sam's like, well, nothing yet, which is a good thing. And Dean's like, oh, you are jealous, you stupid idiot. But then they're like, okay. Anyway, so the current hunt we're on, Sam is like, so this architect, Sean Boyden, plummeted to his death from the roof of his home. It was a condominium that he designed. He had called animal control, like, 2 days earlier, reporting, quote, vicious wild black dogs, but the authorities couldn't find any dogs, and no one else ever saw them. But he didn't show up for work, and then 2 days later he died. Sam's like, okay, well, there's, like, plenty of spectral animals, and there's plenty of, like, black dog legends all over the world. Like, sometimes they're animal spirits, sometimes they're death omens, but there's plenty there. So, like, okay, cool, we're gonna go talk to his business partner, and he has this, like, beautiful house, and they're talking to this guy, and he's like, yeah, honestly, I don't really quite know what Sean's deal was, because, like, 10 years ago, he was a terrible designer. Like, he was a bartender at this place called Lloyd's, and then one morning he wakes up and he's this genius designer and starts, like, producing these plans that no one has ever seen before. So after they hear from this man and are like, okay, like, something weird's going on, they go to animal control, and he talks to this girl, and she's like, there have been 19 calls, all from this one woman, Sylvia Perlman, who kept reporting seeing these black dogs, which is crazy. And then Dean's like, yeah, and after I got the information, this girl, Carly, who I talked to at Animal Control, also gave me her MySpace address? Was that like some sort of porn site? And Sam is like, are you dumb? You don't know what MySpace is? Okay.
It's just so funny because, like, he makes a pop culture reference. He makes old ones, but also he'll be like, MTV Cribs. I'm like, okay, so you know current cultural references, except for MySpace?
Yeah, no, MySpace is where he draws the line. He's like, I'm not doing that. So Sam and Dean go to Sylvia's house, and they speak with her maid. And she's like, yeah, Sylvia, like, left town 2 days ago. She said that she saw some dogs, so I don't really know what's going on with that. And Sam and Dean are, like, talking to her. Dean is kind of poking around, looking at the stuff in her house. And he grabs this, like, picture on the wall. It's, like, her and some friends. And Dean's like, yeah, so she's a surgeon, right? Like, she's only, like, 41 or 42, and she's the head surgeon at this hospital. And the maid is like, yeah, she's the youngest head surgeon in the history of the hospital. And Dean's like, cool, when did she get the job? And she's like, 10 years ago. And then Dean turns the picture over, and he's like, oh, look, Lloyd's Bar, 1996. Then we cut to this woman who is Sylvia, who we saw from the picture. She's pacing around her motel. She's, like, freaking out, clearly on edge. The motel manager comes up and is, like, knocking at the door, and he's like, ma'am, you have to either pay for another night or leave. So she, like, fumbles with her purse, grabs this huge wad of cash out. She turns around to open the door, and the guy is there, and he's like, okay, and then makes this horrendous, like, CGI face. It's very, like, actually quite scary.
It was very scary.
Yeah, like, but it's like this demonic, dead-looking face that's, like, screaming. And he's like, and she's like, ah! And throws the money at the ground and slams the door. And then it cuts to the manager on the other side, and he's like, okay. So it's clear that that was, like, not actually what he was doing. Like, that was her seeing it. But it was really, like, he was like, I can't do this. Okay. So Sam and Dean decide to go to Lloyd's Bar. And Dean is like, hey, Sam, there's, like, flowers. What are, like, across the street here. Like, they're planted in the middle of a bunch of weeds. Have you seen those before? And Sam's like, oh, yeah, they're yarrow flowers. And Dean's like, yeah, aren't those used for, like, a lot of summoning rituals? And also, isn't it weird that both of these people found success 10 years ago? Like, exactly 10 years ago? And also, this bar is on a crossroads? And Sam's like, oh, yeah, that is kind of whack. So Dean starts digging a hole, like, in the center of the street, in the center of this crossroads, and finds a metal box. And they open it, and there's a bottle of dirt, a bone, and some, like, other items. And they kind of are talking about it.
It was a black cat bone. I was like, hey!
I was like, how did you know that? It is just a cat bone. I think they know, because they're like, okay. Like, he pulls the dirt out, and Sam's like, I'm willing to bet that's graveyard dirt. Also in this box, they find a picture of a man.
Also, here's a question. Can it be any kind of crossroads? Because would the I-95 mixing bowl count as a crossroads where you could summon a crossroads?
No, because imagine making a deal there. You're done. No, because that would be embarrassing. I would hope that I would get got earlier, because I'd be embarrassed.
I'm just imagining.
Just playing in the space. But they're looking and they're like, this is some really serious, like, hoodoo.
And I want to point out, they've mentioned hoodoo on this show a lot, and I'm like, you are not actually talking about hoodoo at any point.
No, literally.
This might be the first episode where it is actually used in its, like an actual thing.
Yeah.
But not at this point in the episode.
Later on. But yeah, they're like, okay, so there's these items used for summoning. Like, this makes sense. Like, this is stuff that someone would use for summoning. And Dean's like, okay, this is like a crossroads. People make pacts at crossroads all the time. Like, that is a big thing. This is not just like a demon they're summoning. They're making deals with it. People are making deals at this crossroads. And Sam's like, oh my god, you're right. They aren't seeing black dogs. They're seeing hellhounds, which are like, quote, demonic pit bulls. And I'm like, leave the Pitbull's name out of your mouth.
Literally, I was like, leave them alone.
Yeah, but he's like, okay, so there's these demonic creatures that come and, like, drag you to hell when it's your time. Then we cut back.
That's an important mousecatool that we'll need for later.
So then we cut back to Sylvia in this hotel, or in this motel room. The door is rattling. She's crouched, like, behind the bed, covering her ears. She's sobbing. Then the knocking stops, and she kind of gets back up and looks around. And then she gets trampled to the ground, and the glass shatters in the windows, and we see her getting, like, scratches in her legs as her pants are getting, like, ripped and her clothes are getting pulled apart. It's clearly claw marks, but we don't see the actual monster. And then we see, like, this streak of blood on the carpet, so it's clear that they got her.
It's actually very well done.
It is.
Have these invisible monsters.
No, it's really interesting, because I think that that's, like, a really difficult thing to do.
It's like well done horror.
Yeah.
Well done, Supernatural.
Yeah, like I said, I think that the actual direction of this episode is really good, too. So, then we cut. It is back to 1930, which was when the cold open took place. Robert Johnson, real life person. Robert Johnson's song Crossroad Blues is playing in the background. And we realize that it's the same guy from the beginning. So the guy from the beginning is actual real life blues player Robert Johnson, who, for those of you who don't know, he was very like, he had a small but strong following, but he died in, like, unpublished circumstances, so his death was not reported on, which is funny because he actually died in 1938. So I'm like, I don't know why he only got 8 years. That feels a little hateful. But he was a really good, really influential blues guitar player. He, like, really pioneered, like, the Delta blues style. But again, he was not super appreciated in his time. And we're actually hearing an actual recording of Robert Johnson's Crossroad Blues, which is funny. It's one of the only recordings of him to exist. And it's the only recording of him doing this song to exist. So that's just a fun fact.
This is also another example of, clearly this show had to be made by a company that was owned by Warner Brothers because of the amount of actual music that they have in here that they would have had to pay an exorbitant amount for.
Yeah. But we see Robert, guitar player from the beginning, put his picture in the box and then bury it in the center of the crossroads. And he turns around and there's this woman, as she's a young black woman, so just keep that in mind. And he turns around and he's like, holy, like he's gonna say like, holy shit or something. And
she's wearing like a white dress.
Yeah. But he's like, holy. And she's like, there's nothing holy about me, baby. And he's like, oh my God. And she's like, so what do you want? Like,
and her eyes turn red.
Her eyes do turn red.
Which is odd, because demons, their eyes usually turn black.
Interesting. But she's like, what do you want? Like, what can I do for you? And he's like, I want to play guitar. I want to be the best bluesman that ever lived. And she's like, okay. And he's like, how do we seal the deal? And she's like this, and gives him a kiss. And then he opens his eyes, and she's gone.
So this is where I have to ask the question. We will be talking about this a little bit later, but as we know, John Winchester made a deal for his son's life.
Did he have to kiss
the yellow-eyed demon? Because they don't show it, but according to this episode, which we will see later on, in order to seal the deal, you usually have to kiss the demon. Now, this lore is played with a little later, where they don't have... Once Crowley gets in charge of hell and puts some rules in place, some HR rules in place, that's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah, Crowley said that's a little unethical, guys.
Crowley said, that's fucked up. No, I ain't doing all that. But... by the logic of this episode, where they show every single time you have to seal the deal with the Crossroads demon, you have to kiss them. John Winchester, you're not beating the allegations. John Winchester has kissed the yellow-eyed demon, not clickbait. It was actually my partner, Claire, who brought that one up, and I was like, how did I never think of this?
That's so dark. Oh my God.
That's why they never show it, because they were homophobic.
So true. So then we come back to the present. Sam and Dean are, like, kind of talking, trying to figure out what to do. And Dean's like, this is just like the Robert Johnson legend, like, where you sell your soul to Crossroads. And Sam is like, what is that? And Dean's like, explains about Robert Johnson, like, who he is. And he's like, yeah, he died choking on his own blood, which is funny because his death, like, the reason that he died was never really publicized. But a big thing about real Robert Johnson and Robert Johnson supernatural version is that a lot of his music did have a lot to do with the supernatural, and a lot having to do with, like, demons and, like, deals and that kind of stuff. So it is, like, a interesting thing to draw on. Like, there is a real life kind of legend about what happened to him. But Dean says, like, oh yeah, he died choking on his own blood and was, like, talking about big black dogs. And Sam's like, okay, cool. So we need to find out if any more people made a deal with this demon. And Dean's like, okay, well, if they made a deal with a demon, like, they did that. That's on them. Like, they made the deal. What can we do? Like, that's their bad. And Sam's like, okay, well, we can't just, like, leave these people to die. And Dean's like, okay, fine.
Damn, it's kind of an asshole move.
Yeah, it was kind of an asshole move, but I'm also like, I get it. Like, I don't agree. I think, yeah, like, probably a good idea to help. But I also think, like, I'm like, I see where Dean is coming from and being like, okay, they made their bed and now they have to lie in it. Again, I don't agree, but I see how his logic is, like, there are people who are suffering for no reason that we could be focusing our energy on. So let's talk. Again, don't agree, but I see his logic. So they agree, like, they're gonna figure out what's going on. They look at this picture again, and they're like, okay, well, maybe we can go to this bar, Lloyd's, like, maybe we can go there and someone will know who this guy is if he's still alive. Then it cuts to them showing up at this guy's door, and Dean...
insulting his house.
Well, they insult his house, yeah, as they're walking up. They're like, well, this is certainly no MTV Cribs. I wonder what this guy made a deal for. Hope it was worth it. Because it's like, you know, an apartment building that's a little, you know, dingy. So they show up at this guy's door, and they notice that, like, there's a line of, like, pepper on, like, outside of the door, like, right at the bottom of the door frame. And then the door, like, suddenly opens, and Sam is like, ah, and Dean is like, you know, when you usually are trying to keep something out, maybe try using salt next time instead of pepper. And
he says, like, yo, you reached for the wrong condiment.
Reached for the wrong condiment. Yeah. And then they're like, so you made a deal with like a deal 10 years ago, right? And this man, George Darrow, is like, you guys, no. Like, he tries to close the door on them, and they're like, no, please. We want to help you. And he's like, okay, you guys have 5 minutes. And he lets them in. And he's like, also, the stuff outside my door is goofer dust, which is protection against demons. And they're like, oh, well, salt is, what is that? And he's like, you guys allegedly are hunting the supernatural, and you don't know what goofer dust is? You dummies. I learned it from my grandmother.
I love him dragging them to filth. And no. This is where he's like, yeah, so this is hoodoo, and, like, I learned it from my grandmother. Shut the fuck up. Yeah. I'm like, I fear this might be one of the first examples we see of a, like, black person getting to talk about hoodoo. Like, every other time it's been mentioned has been by in a very appropriative white person. Yeah, in a very bad way.
In a very bad way. But yeah, he's like, you guys are kind of idiots. Like, here, you know what? Here, if you guys need so much help, here, you can take some. And he gives them a little bag of it. And they're like, okay, well, like, we can help you. And he's like, I don't want to be helped. And we see around his house, he has, like, a bunch of very beautiful, like, interesting paintings. And he's like, I made my deal that I wanted to be an amazing painter, but I realized that doesn't come with the fame. That doesn't come with the money. Like, I should have wished to be famous instead of just, like, I should have made a deal to be famous instead of just asking to be skilled. But they're like, okay, well, we can stop it. You've got time. He's like, no, I don't. Like, sometimes people make their beds and they have to sit down and lie in it. I left my goofer dust. I just want to finish my last painting. And I'm gonna die, and that's okay. Because that's a deal I made. Maybe you guys should waste your time trying to help someone who actually wants help. Like, you know, people would come into that bar and I would see them make deals with this person and they don't realize what the cost of it is. And, like, I barely did, but now I do, but it's too late for me. But he tells them the name of this other guy, Evan Hudson, who also made a deal at Lloyd's 10 years ago. So Sam and Dean are like, okay, like, clearly this guy does not want help. And this is a really actually quite a good scene of this man being like, can you guys fuck off? Like, I don't want your help. So they leave. Then it cuts to Evan, who also made a deal. He's, like, working at his desk, like, in his, like, home office, and he hears barking outside, and he goes and, like, looks out the window, and then his wife walks in, and she's like, hey, you spying on the neighbors? And he's like, oh, no, I thought I heard something. And she's like, okay, well, I'm gonna be gone for the weekend. I'll miss you. And she gives him a hug, and he hugs her back and gives her a little kiss. And she's like, are you okay? Like, you've been acting really weird. He's like, no, don't worry about it. You know I love you. She's like, okay, I'll call you when I get there. And she turns around, and then she's like, oh, wait, and honey, and he looks back, and her face, like, morphs into that same disgusting face that the motel managers did earlier.
Now that I have a partner, a long-term partner of my own, watching things like this, and I go, if that happened to me,
no,
or like if someone like a demon possessed my partner or whatever, I'm like, yeah, that would fuck. That would fuck with me.
No, I agree completely. I'm like, that is so scary to me. I think it's funny too, like, as an adult, like, there's a lot of things that are, like, scary, like, things that are, like, spooky. I'm like, I don't really get scared by that. I'm also not too terribly superstitious. Well, I wouldn't say I'm, like, a non-believer, but whatever. But it's, like, that kind of stuff, thinking about it, conceptual, I'm like, oh, that's, no. But he sees her face, like, all morphed and crazy, and he's like, ah! And she's like, okay, love you, bye, and turns back into her, and then she leaves. Then we see Sam and Dean, and they are in front of the house, and they knock on the door, and Evan opens it, and he's like, hi, and they're like, hey, you made a deal 10 years ago, and he, like, assumes they're there to collect on it, and he slams the door and runs into the study, and Sam's like, well, what do we do? And Dean's like, watch this, and kicks the door in. They, like, find him, they're walking around, and they see the door to the study closed, and Dean goes to kick it down, and Sam's like, dude, wait. Evan, like, we aren't demons, we're actually here to help you. And he's like, oh my god, okay, fine, I guess I can get your help, like, I can't really trust you. And they're like, well, you don't have a lot of options. So, like, okay, let's figure out, what did you ask for? And he is like, my wife. And they're like, what? And he's like, well, my wife was dying of cancer, and I needed to save her. So, yeah. So, like, I did this for her. And Dean's like, okay, like, that's cool and all, but, like, you made that choice. So, like, you chose this, so, like, we're gonna help you, but, like, you remember you chose that. And also, you made that decision for your wife because you couldn't live without her. It was selfish. You did it because you couldn't live without her, and now she's gonna have to live without you.
It's
very, yeah.
I was like, whoa, the foreshadowing. This foreshadowing was probably not on purpose. I was like,
again, yeah.
Dean, you maybe want to stop saying those words.
Yeah.
You want to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, bad news. But Dean is clearly having this thing where he's like, if you made a deal with a demon, that's on you. They're like, okay, we're gonna help you. And Dean and Sam step into the hall, and Dean's like, okay, you take the goofer dust and keep the hellhounds away from Evan. I'm gonna go to the Crossroads to summon the demon. And Sam's like, you're gonna try to summon the demon? He's like, yeah, I am, and I'm gonna figure something out. And Sam is like, I don't think that that's a good idea, because you've been acting really out of pocket. Like, what's up with that? And Dean's like, I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about. And Sam's like, No, because I think that you think Dad made a demonic deal to save your life. Like, you should stay here. And Dean is like, okay, maybe I do think that. Like, I'm not stupid. Of course I have had that thought. But that being said, you're staying here and I'm going. And Sam, like, does not really fight him on it. So he's like, okay, cool. So we then cut to the Crossroad. Dean puts a picture of himself in this little metal box with the other items. And he buries it. And he turns around and there's this white woman. So I'm like, okay, interesting. This woman. And she's like, my gosh, Dean Winchester. And her eyes turn red, so we know she's a demon. And she's wearing the white dress. And she's like,
are they implying here that, because we have the yellow-eyed demon and then we see other demons with black eyes, that Crossroads demons specifically have red eyes?
I think so, I guess. I assume. Yeah.
Crowley, I need your rules. I need your guidance.
If you could drop maybe like a user guide, some sort of onboarding document, I'd really appreciate it. But she's like, oh my god, Dean Winchester, I know all about you and the deal that your dad made to save you. Oh my god, that's so crazy. And Dean's like, okay, well, I want to make a deal with you, so why don't we talk in my car? It'll be more comfortable. And she's like, oh my gosh, okay. So they start walking towards the Impala. Then
I'm like, girl, this demon, you're dumb.
You're very dumb. Girl, what? Then it cuts to Evan's house. And Sam is like covering the room, like every corner with goofer dust. He's making a circle around Evan. And he's like, you stay here. Then it cuts back. Dean and the demon are walking to the Impala. And Dean's like, I want you to release Evan from his contract. And she's like, well, that's non-negotiable. Like, that's a binding contract. I can't just terminate it. And he's like, you can't or you don't want to. And as she's going to step into the car, she looks down and notices that there's like writing on the ground. And she realizes that Dean has put a devil's trap, if you'll remember from a couple episodes ago, something that can trap a demon inside of it. He's put one under the car. And she turns around and she's like, girl, what are you doing? Like, are you dumb? Did you really think I was gonna fall for that, Dean? Like, that's ridiculous, because you know what? I was willing to help you. I was willing to do things, and now you have just made me angry. And Dean is kind of stepping back, and he's standing under this structure. It almost looks like an old water tower, like a little one, like maybe like 10 feet tall. And Dean's kind of standing by it, and he's like, ugh, didn't work. Okay, well, that's on me. And she's like, okay, listen. Why don't, if you want, I could bring your dad back. Just as he was. Is he supposed to live this nice, long life? And he could be with you guys and your family, and I could give you, 10 more years to be alive with him, and be you, him, and Sam, and live as his family again. And Dean's like, oh, wow, I don't know. I have to think about it. And he's kind of like stepping back, and she's following him. He's like, oh, man. I mean, that could be. And she looks up, and painted on the roof of this structure is another devil's trap. So now she is trapped for real.
Dean in his Thrawn era.
No, Dean literally, Dean is like, I'm playing 4D chess.
The way he has to have like spray paint in the back of the car for this to work. Like,
I love that for him. I mean, I feel like that makes sense for them to have. So she's in there, and Dean's like, okay, well, I'm going to perform an exorcism on you. And he starts like reading the exorcism that they have in Latin. And then it cuts over to Evan's house, and we see that the hellhound is like, we don't see it again, it's invisible, but we see scratching and we hear them growling, like trying to get in the circle. And then it like cuts back as Dean is reading the incantation, and then we see the hellhounds like trying to like blowing away the dust. And then as Dean is like finishing the incantation, the demon's like, okay. I will end Evan's contract if you let me out of this devil's trap. And Dean's like, okay, slay. Yeah, we can do that. And then she leans up and gives him a big old kiss, because that's how you seal the deal.
Again, how did John Winchester seal the deal?
Big questions. Questions are being asked. And she kind of steps back, and we see, like, the hellhounds disappear from where Evan and Sam are. And then...
So this is a question that I have with later episodes, because she doesn't exactly control the contracts. She's basically just like a notary.
Yeah.
or a representative in some way. Like, and like he's like, oh, like, call off your hounds or whatever, but like it doesn't actually end the contract or the deal that's been made. That's my question.
I mean, I guess I think, because that's the thing, is I feel like, I guess because Dean is technically making a new contract, like he's making like an addendum to the original contract. Okay. So he's not saying like undo the contract, he's saying like
amend it.
We're making an exactly. Because he's not saying, like, okay, undo it and kill his wife.
Oh, maybe he needed to have Sam do it, who was pre-law, because he needed to have a little bit more stuff in there. Like, oh, you're never going to go after him again.
Yeah, he needed, like, the fine print. And I mean, honestly, to be fair, though, Sam was obviously not really super practiced, as evidenced by the last episode. I like the idea that Sam was practicing, like, contract law. Like, he was practicing, like, trademark law. He was not practicing... like criminal law, and that's why he was so bad in the last episode.
But also the other question I have about like contracts is that she has been doing these deals with these people, but like, and I guess we see it with the other demon in the beginning as well, like they're not telling you the terms of the contract. So the contract was made in bad faith. It's not like they're giving you a piece of paper and you're not reading the terms and conditions. Like, she's not giving him the terms of the contract. I mean, for Dean, she says, I'll give you 10 years. But for the other people, supposedly, they're not saying, I give you 10 years or whatever. So I'm like,
what's happening here?
What's happening here? Is that why Crowley then has to come in and be like, we need some rules, standards, and guidelines, or else someone could sue us or say that this was done in bad faith because you didn't give us the full terms and conditions?
No, exactly. Crowley has said he is litigious. So we see the wind that's in Evan's study kind of stops, so the hellhounds have dissipated, and she's standing in this devil's trap, and she's like, okay, let me out. And Dean kind of looks at her for a second and doesn't let her out quite yet. And she's like, okay, you cannot be double crossing me right now. How messed up would it be if I was the honest one right now? I'm a demon and I'm the honest one, Dean. That's so jacked up.
I love that line though, because they come back to that later.
Yeah.
Like, especially when, again, I keep mentioning Crowley, but, like, they come back to that with Crowley where he's like, well, at least I'm honest. Like, I might be evil and I might be, you know, the King of Hell and I might be, you know, in charge of all these deals, but at least I'm honest. At least I follow the rules.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Remember when people shipped Bobby and Crowley?
Why would you remind me of that?
I thought it was kind of hilarious. Anyway.
Oh, that's so...
Listen, I feel you're being a negative Nancy. At least they're not related. So she's kind of like, dude, come on. And then Dean's like, okay. And he scratches part of the trap, and she leaves. And she's like, you know what? You should have taken me up on my deal to bring your dad back, because he's somewhere really, really painful right now, and you're never gonna know. Bye. And then the demon like leaves the girl's body. So now this girl is just like, where am I? How did I get here? And Dean's standing there like, oh, cool. Okay, awesome. So,
you know, if you look into that scene a little bit, you're like, this girl probably thought he kidnapped her and brought her somewhere to kill her.
Like, that's exactly what I thought. Like, Dean, also, he did not respond fast enough. He was like, just kind of stood there. I'm like, girl, he needs to be like, oh my god, I just found you here. Are you okay? Dean, you are going to jail.
Also, they do not explain why the demon stuck around after being summoned. All those years ago.
Fun.
They don't explain. Again, that's why they had to bring in Crowley for some rules and regulations.
Yeah, because I feel like it plays kind of fast and loose. I think it's like, when, to be fair, we are dissecting it now and like talking about it. So we're being a little bit more harsh than like when you're actually watching the episode, you're not having these questions like until you think about it too much later.
I was confused of like, okay, so then why did the demon stick around? Because then every single time anybody has made a deal with a Crossroads demon, then the demon just sticks around.
Yeah,
makes sense.
I mean, maybe I'm just not smart enough. I'm not an intelligent television viewer.
I mean, it could also be like they get into the lore later of like, you know, the demons are stuck in hell, so if you like summon them, they want to stay out in the world doing evil little things because they don't want to go back to hell because it sucks there.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why she's just staying doing her job because she doesn't want to go back. So anyways, I just kept thinking about it. I was like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Interesting. So then it cuts back. Sam and Dean are back together, and Dean's like, I don't know how I'm gonna like live with myself now that I know that Dad did a deal so I could be alive. Like, that's not how it was supposed to be.
Now that I'm like, Dad kissed a man.
I can't take this.
This is how he realizes he's gay.
He's like, please, I can't. It's all hitting me too hard. But he's like, Dad like should have died fighting. Like, that was his legacy. He should not have died like bargaining with something he fought his whole life. And Sam's like, Dean, think about all the people that Dad saved, and like think about the number of people that we have saved because of what Dad taught us. Like, that's his legacy, and it's important for us to finish what he started, and that's his legacy. And I was like, that's an interesting take on that, considering the drama that has happened with their father. But I mean, I think it's a complicated thing, so I think that it's an interesting, it's not a bad message to take away from it, but I am just like, I'm like, you guys need to work out your feelings vis-a-vis John Winchester, because they're swinging rapidly back and forth.
Yeah, I was like, Sam, I get it, but also you need to not be that nice to John.
Yeah, you need to be a little bit harsher. To be fair, the pendulum has swung one way for Sam. It'll swing back.
That's true.
I'm always like fascinated by when they draw from like actual like quote unquote like legend.
What's interesting is the next episode also deals with like a real life American urban legend, the Croatoan thing, although
to be fair,
it wasn't like an urban they didn't disappear, they just
like, we know here's the problem. A lot of people like, we don't know what happened to them. Like, yeah, we do. We much did. Like, we pretty much do know what happened to them. So I'm very we'll get to that. That's a teaser for next week, which is funny because at the end of this episode there is like a teaser, which there's never been before. It's really weird.
I think it's because it's only episode 7. It's not like a mid-season finale.
That was my first thought. I was like, is it like a mid-season finale? I was like, no, it's episode 8. Like, it's not. No, it was weird.
I think now that they were on season 2 and they were like, okay, they're going to keep us on the air now and we have stuff planned out and we've clearly filmed stuff planned out. Now we can start teasing like as a show that's going to stick around. And also we've set up all these plot things so that people will be excited to see certain things. So it was very interesting. I was like, oh, a little teaser.
No, it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Interesting.
I know. So, and we just gave you guys a teaser now too. Next episode's crazy. I feel like we're walking in their footsteps.
Yeah.
We're basically just like Supernatural, you and I.
Oh,
Mysteries
that's
Podcast
dark.
This is screw the Winchesters television show original series. This is about us. I do fear if we are comparing us, I fear I am kind of the Sam. So I mean, just because I'm a little guy, but I'm also taller. And I have demonic powers.
Oh no, not me being Dean coded.
That's the thing. I don't even think you're Dean coded. It's just that it doesn't make sense any other way.
Thank you guys for joining us and listening. For more Cursed Supernatural content, you can follow us on social media at Mystery Spotcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also ask us Cursed Supernatural questions in our TikTok Q&A or by emailing us at themysteryspotcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed listening to us suffer, please rate the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, Overcast, whichever podcatcher you use that allows for ratings and reviews, do that. And also go on Podchaser as well. It really helps. It really is very helpful, and thank you very much. If you want to hear more from us, we're also two of the co-hosts of RuPaul's Pod Race, a queer Star Wars podcast, which will be starting our Andor coverage, so now is the time. So yeah, see you 2 Tuesdays from now for more slaying people, queer baiting things, the supernatural business.